Alright, here's another update in my combat system. Probably one of the latest, the last major updates. Um, this one was mostly dealing with uh, advanced AI, dealing with adding in combat circles, adding in enemy separation. Before we get to that, I had some smaller changes, some of the last stuff we did. So I had guarding is now input looped. So whenever before if you tried to do an attack and tried to guard immediately afterwards, you have to wait until the animation completely finished before the attack completely finished. But now it's input loop, so I can attack and just hold down guard, or I can dodge and hold guard and it'll guard at its soonest opportunity. Another change is you can now pause the game. Right now the menus aren't set up for controllers, so I can't like move left down or anything like that and cycle through the options, but I can still unpause. That'll be probably a minor change I'll make whenever I get to making a actual like game out of it. But until then, it's just fine for PC. Another change here I did is that the health bars. Now, whenever you attack something, you can see that little bit of damage you do on the health bar, and it'll like go away with some time. So I can go over here and hit this enemy, and you'll see that if I continue to hit them, it won't go down, but once I stop hitting them after about 3 seconds, I think it is, it'll start going down at a constant rate. So this helps show the player how much damage they're doing, and also same thing happens to the player's health bars. You'll see later when I turn the AI back on. But their health bar goes down the exact same way, so you can look up and see after you've been hit, oh, that did that much damage. Let's see here. I fixed something I had in last time, but it wasn't working properly. But I think I did. I think it was in here last time. I'm not sure. But strafe and run by default. So what this kind of turns on something kind of like MOBA-esque movement. You'll see this kind of movement in Smite. So by default, whenever you're moving left and right, it's just strafing. Whenever you go forward past a certain degree, let me use my controller here. Whenever you go forward past a certain degree, to transition and start running again. So this is kind of like, mouse and keyboard style of movement. You'll get running forward all the time. But on controller, you can have to move your stick past a certain value. And I think right now that's like 0.3 or 0.5, one of the two. It's enough where it's like if you're going full forward, it's going to make sense to run. And this just uses the idle to run blend space, I think. And yeah, and then I have some speed conditionals in there. So once you're past, I think 375 is a standard run speed. Once you're past that, you're going to start transitioning into running if you're pressing forward and it's past a certain degree on the stick. Another thing I added in is aiming. Let me turn this off. See this a little bit better. Added in an aim mechanic. Most action games typically have this, where you have something like throwing a batarang or like shooting a grappling hook or something like that. So now you can just press the left stick down and it'll turn this on. It doesn't have a reticle or anything on it right now. It's just pretty bare bones, but it's here for any future integrated use to it. And you can switch sides if you want to. And that's made just by moving in between these. I put arrows on the player character. So it's just made by moving the camera to these preset locations. So you see this arrow here is the original location, and then these two are just the lock-ons, or the aiming right side and the aiming left side. And you can see that engine is slow today. You can see that. Is that it? No. Right here. So you just have the standard input loop here, and it checks if it's stunned at all, or if it's attacking. And it'll set the field of view, which right now is, for the default aim, it's just 0.8 because it just feels right to me. But you also have this aim call here, so if you wanted to like have an ability that turns on aiming, but you want it to be like really far down, or say you have you're holding a different weapon or something like that and has a different field of view, you can set that here, custom. You'll go in here and then it'll stop the input loop, and it'll go and turn on rotate towards look direction, which is this one? No. Click on it. It'll turn on control desired rotation, so that just rotates it towards whatever you're looking at. And it turns off orient rotation of movement, so that's when you're going to get just looking at wherever you're pointing at, kind of the twin stick tank movement. And then from there it turns on aiming and turns on strafe start because that's when it starts strafing. Then it goes into aim update conditionals. And in here it's just going to get essentially what this does is, I wrote it down on the comments right here. Is the camera at the location and the rotation it should be. So it'll go in and it'll get, if it's aiming right, it'll get the right one. If it's not aiming right, it'll get the left one. They get these locations for if you're starting to aim. And it'll say, all right, are you at this location yet? If you're not, then it'll continue running, taking input from the tick, right? It'll open up this gate and it'll run the tick through, and it'll continue coming out to it's not equal from there. And that runs in, goes to the interpolation right over here, right? So it'll take your interp feed in here and it'll just interpret from where it's at now to where it needs to be. And then once it gets to there, this check will come through and it'll say, all right, it's equal within certain specifiable parameters. So right now it's 0.1. If you're really close to it, it's just going to be enough and it'll stop the tick, so it's not running the tick, over and over again and using up unnecessary processing power. And then the same thing goes for when it's coming back. It'll check and see if it's close. And for that one, I have it set to like 0.001 because I want that to be as accurate as possible. But for aiming left and right, it's not terribly important right now. But of course, you can go in and specify that yourself. So yeah, after it's done aiming, you'll just continue setting the rotation and then set the field of view. And then after it gets down here, it'll reset the field of view. And right now, it just currently sets it back to the original field of view. But if you want to set it back to, I don't know, something that's different, or if this value has been modified since the play began, it'll change it. You'll have to go in and change that back to whatever it is. But right now, it's just whatever it started on event begin play. So that's aiming. The thing I did here is dodging. Dodging and lock on were the other two things that needed to be changed. A lot of them, because mostly issues with dodging and lock on were with the camera. So now rotation is now set to the current target when locked on and dodging. So before, whenever I would dodge, I would get like this camera stutter where like the camera seemingly was like staying in one position, and then I'd finish dodging, it would like snap back to looking at the character or looking at the target, and that's because I wasn't setting it as it was locked on. But now I do it, so now you can see it's smoother. Now the player also has different dodges when they're locked on. So you can see here now I'm using a step dodge. The standard dodge is just like you just rotate towards your direction, but whenever you're locked on now, it's a step dodge. So you can see here I can go backward, left, right. If you go forward, it's still this same dodge, but this is also on a it looks at the input axis and sees, are you within like I think it's like 0.33. If your axis is around 0.334, it'll change it to this direction. So you can see here, this is left, right. But if I'm going here, like top left, it's still about left. If I go more forward, I get the rotating force. So you can see if I can go like move around them. And of course, you can go in and toggle those. And then by default, if you are not pressing any button on the stick, if you just press dodge, you're now go dodge backwards. Before, when you start out and try dodging, it wouldn't actually give you anything because the movement input direction was 0. So it would say, well, you're not going anywhere, so I can't give you anything. And it would, because it's multiplying a force times the movement input direction, you wouldn't get a dodge the first time you try dodging without pressing any movement. So if you just got out of a cutscene and your character just spawned something and tried to dodge out of the way, it wouldn't happen. But now it does. That's just more or less a bug, but it's fixed now, along with this new functionality of step dodge backwards. All right, and then lock on. What's the other one I did? So I wasn't a huge fan of the lock on system I had got from a tutorial, but I'd realized that I had missed setting a variable at the end of checking distance between an enemy. So whenever I would go to like cycle locks, that wouldn't work. It wouldn't see that one enemy was closer than the other one, so it wouldn't set it correctly. That was one part of it. And then the other part of it was that the guy I got tutorial from wanted like a wedge between. He wanted like a null zone where it's like an enemy is like right on top of another enemy. If you try cycling to that one, it wouldn't give you anything. and I don't know why he wanted to define a strict forward, and I didn't want a strict forward. I wanted to have, moving between enemies, because that's what people think when they go for a cycling lock on. So I removed that almost completely. So now it's like 360. Before it's like 350. It's like a 20-degree angle where you couldn't do anything, but now it's like 360. You can cycle left, right. You also cycle now up and down. Before I just had left and right because I didn't see the need for it, but this gives the player a bit more control because I mapped it to the right stick on the controller, so now it just feels more natural to think, okay, I want to hit that enemy that's more upwards and to the left, so you can just press up and the left and they'll give you this one. It may actually give you two different cycles, but it'll get you what you want, and that's the important part of the design of it. And that fires off on an axis value. So once the right stick axis is past a certain value, it'll trigger it. So you can see here, it seems kind of like, it's not really snapping. You can see the camera kind of moving a bit. That's because I'm moving the camera just slightly. I'm moving the camera slightly because I'm moving the right stick slightly as I do that. And when it hits 0.7, then it cycles over. So that's how that changed. I also did something, it was the way it was, I changed how it was coded a little bit as well, because it was getting like a start vector from when you first started locking on. But if you ever locked on and then moved someplace, if you ever tried to cycle that lock, the ray cast would be completely off because it would be from a different location. So I just I got whatever I was using to define start vector, and I changed it. But yeah, that's all the changes I made to what was previously existing. So I'm going to get into kind of the meat of the things here. The stuff that took me actually 3 weeks. And that's the enemy AI. So before I wasn't using EQS, which is kind of like this experimental AI thing, and that's because I didn't understand like where it was actually getting this information from, kind of. So before, you'll see here this grid is off, right? I turned it off. Okay, then. I'm not gonna mess with this because this EQS is actually really buggy. There's another reason why I didn't work on it, because I thought it was actually bugged out when I was messing around with it. But the point is, it had a grid that it spawns around what I want to be the player, but it was spawning it around over here and not near the player. And I couldn't understand for the longest time why, but that's because the player wasn't instantiated, so it was spawning it at 0, 0. So I didn't use it because I thought that was another bug in it. I thought it was too buggy to use, but I realized that's not a problem with it. With that being said, though, I can't actually adjust any of these values right now without it running the risk of it really crashing. So I'm just gonna click around and show you that some of these values that I have here. But it basically draws a grid around the player for this one, right? At least, they both draw around the player, and it'll try to remain within a certain distance from the player, while also trying to separate from other enemies around it. And it'll prefer to, if it doesn't find a value, or if it finds itself to be too close to the enemy or the player, it'll look towards a value that's closer to itself, but also satisfies those other conditions. And that's something I could specifically only do in EQS. So that's why I didn't have this integrated last time, because I didn't find it. But yeah, that's how EQS is doing now. So now you can see it in action here. See if I get too close to the enemies. If they're not permitted to attack, they'll back up. So I'll see that enemy's backing up there. That one's trying to attack, and you see after you're done attacking, they'll back up, because you're only allowed to be within that certain radius if you're trying to attack the player. Right? So you can just like sit there and draw a circle around it. The player, you can see that that's where they're trying to stay away from. And then you also see if they get too close to one another, they'll back up. And that's kind of giving you that natural separation around the player, right? That this forming of a circle isn't something I'm going in and coding. I'm not programming saying surround the player. It's just that they want to stay farther away from one another while also being closer to the player, and that's something that's only afforded by a circle. So that's what's happening here. And now it has a different behavior flow as well. So before it was just look at the player, move to the player, and then if you're within a certain radius, ask the game mode if you can attack, and then you'll get permitted to attack, and if you're still in that radius, then attack. that's not exactly how it works anymore. So now it'll go through, it'll still look at the player, and still move in. Well, no, this is if they're attacking. It'll still come here, and it'll still move to the player. And then once it succeeds moving to the player, it'll try to separate. It'll see, okay, now that I'm close to the player, now that I'm, satisfying what the player expects me to do and seeking them, let me try to separate from the other enemies around me. And what I did here is actually code something called strafe to, then run to. So you'll see whenever I get too close to an enemy, or an enemy is too close to something else, but that's aiming, you'll see that they'll strafe back towards their location. They won't like turn around and completely run back there. That's what I code. It's called strafe to, then run to, which does exactly as it sounds like. So over time, first it'll get that location that it wants to be at from the enemy separation, or from settle, either one of those two. It'll get that location, and then it'll turn off orient rotation to movement, so that it's kind of it has to strafe away from the location. And it sets the walk speed to 0, and then it turns on strafing for the animation blueprint, so it starts the strafing animation. Then it comes up here, and what happens is that over time, it starts this tick, and over time, it'll gradually go back to the maximum move speed. And then once it hits that maximum move speed, they'll turn completely around and start running, right? Just from orient rotation to movement. So it gets that feeling of the enemies kind of like cautiously backing up. And then once they feel that they're too far away, then they're gonna if they've been trying to get to the location for too long, they're gonna run, right? Because it's at that point in time, it's pretty clear that they really want to get to that location. And this makes this more natural. So the enemies will still be cautious, but they won't be fast enough to completely run away from the player, right? I didn't want the player to just walk towards an enemy and then the enemy turns around and starts running, and you're always chasing the enemy around to get hit off. I didn't want that. So now you just it's just this slow thing. The player can always catch up, and it's also on a time limit as well. So I think the cooldown on it is about 2 seconds. So you'll see if I move closer and then they back up. What you need backed up. If I go back again, they have another period about 2 seconds. See that they can't back up. So once you back up again, I'm free to attack them. Alright, let's see what else here. Actually, the meat of everything is let's look at some of the tasks here. This is the movement speed increase. You can see here the time start and the time until max speed, which is specifiable, by the way. So you can go in and say here time until max speed is 2.5 seconds for that one, but I think for this one up here, yeah, it's 3.5 seconds. So you can specify that and which blackboard key you're getting. So I can go in and make a EQS query for enemy separation, right, and then move it to have it be for move to player point, and then pass that one into this one, and then have this be a completely separate EQS query, have it be a different name, and then pass it into strafe then run to. So this makes this malleable. I can use that different places. And then the big thing that makes these smooth is the abort. I'm actually overriding the abort so that once the AI move to fails, or if the enemy is attacked and they need to abort something, that's handled by all these decorators. If any of these decorators fails, if it's the override observer abort set itself, it'll come down here and it'll abort this, and what happens is it'll just completely stop the it'll reset all the strafe and move to stuff, reset the max speed back to the original max speed, turn strafing off, and then stop the movement itself, and then finish execute as a failure, so that none of the rest of this executes. And because it's hit stunned, it can't do. I don't think it can do anything. Yeah, right now it hits stunned. It can't do anything. I can add another separate sequence up here. Say if you're hit stunned, maybe you try to. I don't know if it's like a fighting game, try to burst or something like that, or maybe ask for help or something like that, or maybe want to play a sound if they get hit from doing something out of something else. But yeah, that's. Right now, it's just if they're hit stun, just about all of this fails. So, yeah, I think that's everything. Oh, the game mode. Yeah, no, the game mode is it's another big one. So, what I did for this is I made I think last video I introduced this third-person game mode, which handles the encounter start, encounter end. But what I also did here now is I added in group attacking. So before, if enemies wanted to attack more than once, I just had a variable called max enemies attacking at once, and then if the enemies that were allowed to attack was less than that number, it would just keep getting enemies. But the problem with that though is that if enemies don't attack, if enemies attack whenever they want to, things start to become too muddled. The player can't really discern flow, and it feels kind of cheap. You know, if you try to if an enemy attacks you and you like perfectly react to it and you dodge to the side and attack them, but another enemy immediately starts attacking with a faster attack as you're attacking, there's nothing you can do about it anymore. You just get hit and it feels cheap because you couldn't, react to that happening. The enemy just seemingly reacted to you attacking and attacked. So that wasn't fair. So now it's called I have synced group attacks. So you can turn this on or off. So if you want it on, it can be something like the free flow system in Batman, where you have 2 or 3 enemies coming at you and they'll attack at once. And if you dodge, if you seemingly dodge one, you dodge all 3 at the exact same time. Or you can turn it off and have it be false. And it'll be similar to a more punishing system like Dark Souls. In Dark Souls, enemies do not care what other enemies are doing, right? They will lock you into a corner and they will continue wailing on you one after another. They will stun lock you if they can, because they don't care about synced group attacks. So this key thing is also a really big thing for defining the combat system. One of the big things, at least. So anyways, what it does is it'll set a group attack type from here, determine group attack type here. And what it does, you have these chances. You have single attack chance, double attack chance, triple attack chance. And you can just go in and just change the default values to those, and it'll get you different values, different chances for that to happen. And then it'll just get a random floating range whenever it needs to call this function. And if it's within 0 to single attack chance, it'll give that. And it's kind of in order of priorities, but that priority kind of doesn't matter, I guess, because the min maxes are kind of, you won't, like, the single attack chance is not within range of double attack chance, so I guess it doesn't matter. But anyways, it'll have 0 to single attack chance, and then it'll have single attack chance to double attack chance plus single attack chance. So it's kind of just like, if you're within these ranges of values, it'll give you the group attack type, which is really just the number of enemies. So this is group attack type 1, this is 2, and this is 3. I'm stopping at 3 just because I don't really see the need to have like 4 or 5 enemies attacking at once. That sounds more like a set piece to me. That needs to be like strictly coded, but adding a new one of these should really be any more simple than just changing this number. Just change the number and it'll get you 4 or 5 if you want that. But yeah, once it sets that, it'll go back to the event graph, and then this will keep running as long as it's less than the group attack type clamped to the enemies in the encounter. And group attack type is actually also clamped to the maximum enemies attacking at once. So you can still set this value and have it be, 1. If it's 1, if you get 2, it'll clamp it back to 1. So this essentially like combines the chances together, but that can also be, I think that can be worked around. Not sure. I'm not really seeing the reason to change that as much, because you can just change this to 0.3 and that to 0.3, and it'll be a combined value of 0.6 if both of these are 1. So there's a ways around it, but it works. Anyways, whenever an enemy gets within location, it will check how many enemies are attacking. If it's the only enemy that's attacking, like with group attack type 1, if that's true, Unreal will freeze. Ugh. If that's true, it'll just go straight to attacking. Well, it'll check if it can attack. If it can, it'll go into attacking. But if it can't, it'll go to ready to attack, which just lets the game mode know that it is in fact ready to attack. And it'll go through here and it'll add it to an array of enemies that are ready to attack. And once this array is equal to the group attack type, that'll be everybody's ready. And it'll go in here and it'll stop this group attack expire, which is just a certain amount of time before enemies stop trying to group attack. And then it'll go through here and it'll loop through every enemy that's in the ready to attack and just call their direct attack call, which just goes straight to can it attack if it can attack. So that's what it does. And so you get really smooth looking things like see if I can get one here. Probably could have just turned the chances up, but That's the easy way. Here's 2. So see, they're attacking at the exact same time. And it'll, once it's done choosing one, it'll go through and find another value. So right now that's 1, and then once it's done finding one enemy to attack, it'll set the value again to something else. So you can see in the top left corner, it's still setting it back to 1, but it'll get to like 2 or 3 every once in a while. There's 2 right here, and you can see if I avoid one of the others, they will expire eventually. So yep. And also saw one of the bugs as well with the last enemy to attack. Before, the enemy seemingly didn't care if they were the last enemy to attack, they would just continue attacking. That's because I had multiple wires coming out of this get, and I didn't know that multiple wires coming out of the get would give you different values at different points in time. I thought it would just get one value and then output it as the only output, but that's not the case. So now I'm just coming out, having it set it as chosen enemy, and then using that value everywhere else. So that solves the last enemy to attack bug. And that solves some other bugs I had with that as well. And last but not least, I had the death animation, so the player can now, well, the player and enemies will now like die in a way that is visually appealing. And then the player is invincible when getting up, which is really kind of something for everybody. You can turn that on for enemies as well. It's just turning on a anim notify. And then I added in ground teching. So see here, when an enemy hits me, controller turn off. No. An enemy hits me, that's the standard animation for it. But if I try to ground tech, I press X to get up immediately. So that's something that's always useful. The player just get back into the action. And then we get a death animation here. And there's 2 different kinds of death animations. There's one on the ground where you just get, I'm not paying attention. There's one on the ground, kind of like, oh, I've been slashed, and he just falls over and dies. And then there's one in the air. So you can see, just fall back to the ground, hit the ground, and die. And then let this play out and see the player's death animation. On death for the player, currently I'm just turning off the inputs, so the player can't press anything right now. But whenever they die, I'm planning to have a turn their inputs into UI only and just have it be a death screen and press, respawn or quit game or something like that. But yeah, that's the system so far. That's probably gonna be the last major update. The only things I can see myself tweaking are adding in the full controller support and menus, and then tweaking the AI. I don't think I'm ever gonna stop tweaking the AI just because that's something that's very difficult, and it's something I don't think I'm going to get right for a while. So, yep. That's it so far. So I'm going to post some gameplay and a separate video after this, but this is just for the update. So thanks for following, thanks for watching.